We're here today on behalf of the Hamilton College Jazz Archives. My name is Monk Rowe. This is Michael Woods. And today we have one of the best-known trombone players in jazz. Mr. Urbie Green is with us to talk about his experiences in jazz. Welcome.
Nice to be here, thank you.
It's a nice setting. We're on the Royal Caribbean, and Urbie will be playing a set tonight. And I'd like to start off, we've had some really interesting talk about how people got started in the music business. Some of players happen to fall into circumstances that changed their whole lives. Some people kind of had to work for years and years before they found their niche. I wonder if you'd like to talk about that.
Well, just that part's a long story. Let me think how I can cut it short. Let's see, how I got into music.
Yeah.
Well, I was one of 5 children, and we had a mother that played the piano a little bit, and so she started each one of us with the basics of playing the piano. And my brother Al was about, let's see, I started when I was about 5, I guess. 5, but we all started about that same age. And my brother Al, who was the second child in the family, was the first one that really got into the professional category of music. And about, let's see, in the mid-30s, I can't remember exactly what year it was, we grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and that was right in the middle of the Depression, the Great Depression, and things weren't so hot down there. I mean, financially anyway. Pretty hot otherwise. We decided to go to California, so we drove out to California, all the kids and my mother, although my father and oldest brother stayed back in Mobile until we got settled out there. And I remember we made the trip in a Model A Ford, and all through Route 90, all the way through Louisiana, Texas, and Arizona, New Mexico. And we found a house to rent right in the middle of Hollywood, and my brother Al was about 16 or 17. Went to Hollywood High School, which was about 3 blocks away from where we lived. And he played piano in a little jazz band and with the school kids there. And his best friend in that band was Earl Hagen. Do you know the name of Earl
Yes.
Hagen? And he was played trombone,
Mm-hmm.
and later became one of the big Hollywood writers and composers. I guess everybody knows his song Harlem Nocturne. That became like a real standard. And so my brother got interested in the trombone from Earl, and he bought his old trombone from him. I think it was $2 or something like that. Beat up old horn, yeah. And that horn went down to my brother Jack. Well, first of all, after a year in Hollywood, we went back to Mobile and took that trombone with us. And when my brother Jack was about 12, he took up that trombone and got a new one, like throwing papers or something like that, paper route. And he gave me the old one, and that was when I was 12. And that's how the trombone came into the family. And I played all through high school and started playing with local professional guys around town, I guess when I was about 15. And is that enough of how I got into it? Or then it goes a long ways from there?
Yeah, I know. We'll get to that.
Okay.
So you had basically a high school education as far as your trombone, and then...
And the piano training we had earlier was a real good introduction to music, because my mother taught us all how to read music. She didn't know a lot about it herself. She knew just like the basic value of the notes. A quarter note gets a beat, and a few things like that. But she made us practice, let's see, an hour a day in the wintertime, 2 hours a day in the summertime.
Right. What do you consider to be your first break in the business?
Well, it might have been when World War II broke out. All the good guys went into the Army, so they had to hire us kids to play.
I'll be darned.
That was about the way I really got into it, I guess. And playing around Mobile for a couple of years, I think it was about 16, there was a band from Auburn, Alabama, that was known as the Auburn Knights, a college band. They were a very good big band, and they were playing a date in Mobile. And they came over to this place called the Airport Restaurant where I was playing with a little band, and they heard me play and offered me a chance to go up to Auburn and play with their band, although I was still in high school. So I moved up there and played, I guess, one semester. And went to Auburn High School. And that summer, they had a summer job at Virginia Beach. No, it was usually Virginia Beach, but that year it was Wrightsville Beach, South Carolina, or North Carolina, I guess it was. So we went up there, and a big band came through there that was looking for a trombone player, and so this was in the summertime. A band by the name of Tommy Reynolds, and he was from New York. He was one of the up-and-coming new bands, and they were going into the Lincoln Hotel in New York, I think, but I couldn't stay because I had to go back and finish my high school. So, but anyway, I met a lot of guys that I ran into later on, and like one of them in particular, a fellow named Al Ramsey. He was a trumpet player who, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I went back to Mobile, and I didn't stay in high school. I dropped out because another band came through town, and I was going to New York, so I figured I'd finish my school later on. So he was going to Roseland Ballroom, so that was my first trip to New York. That band was Bob Strong, a band from Chicago, and it was their big break going to New York, playing Roseland and getting coast-to-coast broadcasts every night. And so I joined that band and stayed a few months, and this Al Ramsey fellow, meanwhile, had gone with another band, Frankie Carl's orchestra, and he recommended me to go from Bob Strong, and I went to Frankie Carl. No, I forgot, I left out a year. It was after Bob Strong, I went with Jan Savitz's orchestra, who was kind of a pretty well-named band of the 40s. And it was kind of important, that band, because we were going to California, and we stayed there for about 8 weeks, which gave me time to finish my high school education. Wow. There was a school close by called the Hollywood Professional School that a lot of kids that were in movies and things went to. So while I was playing out in Southgate, California at the Trianon Ballroom, I went to high school in the daytime, got my diploma from the Hollywood Professional School.
By this time, was music your career? I mean, you said, okay, I'm going to be a musician now. This is something I can do.
I suppose so. I think you were talking to Houston Person earlier about if you just fall into it or what.
Right.
I think I actually kind of just fell into it because the older brothers kind of led the way, you know, and the trombone was there, and you might as well play it. It's there, you know.
Right.
And let's see. I don't know. I could take up the whole story before I get to be 18 years old, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we've got some specific questions to ask about some of the big groups later on that you played with, and were you influenced by recordings?
Oh yeah, like it was like during the big band era, I guess, the late 30s and early 40s, and we always heard the big bands, you know. Tommy Dorsey was a good example of how the trombone ought to sound, I guess. He was very popular, and along with Benny Goodman and Count Basie, Duke Ellington. Trummy Young was I remember that was one of the solos I used to practice on his solo on Margie when I was still in high school. We used to, with the Jimmy Lunsford band. And he sang a chorus and then played a chorus. And I think I never heard anybody hit a high F sharp before that.
Did you ever have an occasion to play with Basie in any context?
Well, in the recording studios, he would come to New York to make records, and he normally only carried 3 trombones with him, so they'd add me onto the band and to fill out the section, and ended up got a few solos down on record with Basie, and I think I had about 4 albums, and then Ella Fitzgerald came in and recorded with the Basie band, and so they added trombone on that, and Sammy Davis Jr. Like the recording studios got me into a lot of different situations. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of people come through New York and add me onto the band.
I wanted to ask you about your work with the Basie band. Can you tell us about the sound or the feel of that rhythm section? Because everybody says they like that rhythm section. That was the rhythm section, big band, the big band rhythm section.
Yeah, well, anytime I ever do high school and college clinics, I always tell them to listen to that Basie band. Well, the whole band, but particularly the rhythm section, and it's just an example of the way it's supposed to go. You know, I mean, in that type of music, anyway. And I remember during the period that I played with him, we were normally recording at the A&R studio on 48th Street, which was a very small room, probably about half as big as this room, and
wow.
the whole band in there, and the time was so precise, you know, and I had just left. I mean, before I went to New York to do a lot of studio work, I had played with Woody Herman and Gene Krupa's bands Gene for about 4 years and Woody for 3 years, and although those bands all admired the Basie and Ellington bands very much, it was just a little different. Sometimes I always noticed that the Basie band didn't really play as loud as you think they're playing either. You know, like we would get up with Woody and we'd blast away all night and blow the walls down. We thought, but sometimes if you play a little softer, it sounds bigger, you know, than if you're, the louder you play, the thinner it gets. Mm-hmm. But that just settled back a little bit, and it kind of opens up a real wide, warm sound. It was really...
Kind of that concept like, we ain't really working, or this ain't hard.
Yeah, but it sounds bigger than when you're blasting away. You know?
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with the balance, too. Being able to hear everything. You know, I'm sure when a band is wailing away at top, the piano disappears and certain other parts of the music.
Well, Basie could always find those holes anyway, though.
Yeah.
Even,
choose his moments,
yeah.
wouldn't he?
Well, I think the Basie band did leave a lot of open spots. So generally,
Did Freddie Green play unamplified?
Yeah. I think he might have had a microphone in front of him. I'm not even sure. I mean, it wasn't a pickup, electric pickup. You know? It wasn't that kind of an amplification where it's attached to the guitar.
Yeah.
But I think that he probably, well, everybody had a microphone in the recording studio. Although in the earlier days, sometimes they did all those records with one microphone, I guess.
Wow.
Like
that means they had to be balanced.
Yeah.
Like their Carnegie Hall jazz thing that Benny Goodman did, I think, with just one microphone. So they balanced themselves. And over the years, it's gotten so everybody is very isolated in studios now. You got your own microphone and your own earphones, and so the whole balance is up to the engineer. Whereas getting a balance within yourselves is not all that important anymore or critical.
I wanted to ask you about your personal style of playing the trombone. When you were coming up, who did you listen to? Who did you think was the voice on trombone? And as Monk has referred to, when did you decide that you had a voice?
Well, I think you strive to find your own feelings and emotional contact with the music, you know, so that'll make it individual no matter who you are. You know, if you can really do what's true to yourself, you know, that's about as good as you can get, I guess. Well, of course, with all the other influences getting you ready for it, you know, in the meantime. But the early voices, I guess, Trummy Young and a fellow, Jack Jenny. I never heard a lot of him, but he had that solo that was played all around on Artie Shaw's record of Stardust, which opens up with Billy Butterfield on trumpet, who was another one of my favorite players, and Artie Shaw on clarinet. In fact, that whole record was a good exercise. Like starts off with the trumpet and goes into the clarinet and the trombone. In fact, my brother Jack and I we wrote that all out when we were kids and practiced that thing. So there was a little Jack Jenny and Billy Butterfield and Artie Shaw in this too, I guess. And Lawrence Brown was one of my favorite players too.
He was with Ellington, wasn't he? Yeah.
He was very individual sounding. You recognized him right away.
That was the trademark of the Ellington band almost, is that he wrote for certain people, not just the second alto player, you know. The guy he wrote for the individual, I think.
Well, a lot of those ballads, I guess he wrote for Johnny Hodges. Later on, people put lyrics to them and they became pop songs. They don't get around much anymore. Actually, the melody of that was a little different when he first wrote it. But
oh, yeah?
I guess they changed it around.
Oh.
Let's see. That's the way they did it. But right toward the end there was something different on that original. I can't remember what it was, but because it wasn't played too much after it became a pop song. So.
You did some pretty extensive studio work over the years. Was that mostly in New York?
Yeah, after 11 years of traveling around with bands,
yeah.
I finally settled down in New York.
Can you tell us about, was there any studio things that you remember that border on ridiculous?
Or anything that was funny, or just little quirky things about jazz?
Quirky. Let's see.
When I listen to music behind some commercials these days, I'm thinking, you know, people had to actually play this, and someone sat down and wrote this thing, you know, and I'm wondering sometimes how some of the players keep a straight face.
Yeah. Well, in the studio, sometimes you get in a situation where you kind of have to be an actor, like you're not really playing yourself, you know, like what you'd really choose. I mean, I'm talking about musical actor.
Yeah.
Like they'd say, well, play this like Tommy Dorsey, or, you know, and so you try to play, there's only one Tommy Dorsey, but so you do something similar to that, or Jack T. Gordon, I want this, or, well, one time I had to imitate a dog eating dog food with my plunger. So, it was pretty. But I guess that's really I can't think of it. I got a small vocabulary. Never went to no college, you know.
Well, we've had some interesting, you know, talk about what people learn in college and as opposed to what happens out in the real world, you know, and nowadays I know you've done work in colleges with the music programs, and what happens after they get out of school? You know, have you ever talked to students after they got out, and have any insight into, you know?
Well, this young fellow that's playing with us tonight, Chris Potter, are you familiar with him at all?
Yes, I've heard his name.
Just an amazing young player. And my son, Jesse, they're both about the same age, about 23 now, I think. And boy, he knows more about jazz history than I do, but he goes right from the beginning to what's happening now, and there's somewhere in there, Chris, his own thing is coming out too, you know. Yeah, if you haven't heard him, it'd be interesting to hear him. Well, there's an example. He went right to New York, I guess. Got a scholarship to the New School there, and he stayed there for a while. Then he went to the Manhattan School of Music, which I think he's still involved there. And as soon as he got to New York, Red Rodney started using him with his group, so he traveled a lot around with Red. And, well, there's one.
Yeah.
Yeah, ask him about what's happened to the young fellas.
It's unfortunate that the opportunities, as far as the big band playing, and you know, are not nearly as plentiful as they used to be. I think there's probably a lot more talented people out there. They come out of schools and they're scrambling for ways to show what they know and then to go to the next level?
Well, I think of this band out in Santa Monica, California. It was started by Ernest Clark, I think. Trumpet virtuoso back in 1902, I think it was. He started this municipal band out there, about 35 pieces, and within that band they had a regular big jazz band, and then small combos and chamber groups, and it was all, and they're all on salary out there and had their own recording studio. But anyway, it started from 1902, and as far as I know, it's still going today. And they bring in guest artists out there to either play or sing, whatever they do, and they back them up. And it seems like a lot of cities could do something like that rather than only thinking of a symphony orchestra. They could probably have something, I think that was 35 people involved, and then they had a big band and little Dixieland bands or whatever they could use.
In other words, like repertory orchestras to perpetuate jazz. Because if you go to any major city in the United States of America, there's a symphony there that can play all the European classics.
Right. And this thing was financed by a tax, I think it was 50 cents a year or something like that for people that owned property. And that area was a lot of people, maybe 1 million people. I think it finally got up to $1 a year or something like that for every taxpayer, and that was able to finance the salaries of these people and buying a building, a rehearsal hall, and a recording studio. But it seemed like something like that could be done in a lot of places. You think anybody would gripe about $1 a year?
Yeah.
They might.
If you had, if you could pick out a record or two that you would want people to identify as one of your best, was there a time or a particular record or recording that you're most happy with?
Yeah. I think maybe I played better on other people's records than I played on my own. I'm not sure.
Well, there's less to worry about, right?
Yeah, you show up and play.
No,
You're the leader. You got all these headaches, and
Yeah,
people were
I've
worried about
heard
the other
that.
guys showing up,
Yeah.
and how much money you're costing a record company. Boy, if we go overtime, this is gonna. I never record with them again. All kinds of things. When you're the leader, you know that. I don't know. There was a record I did with Tony Bennett a long time ago. I had a couple of spots on it that I got into some kind of other frame of mind for a few bars. It was something about New York, my hometown, or something like that. And he did some kind of eerie songs, not really eerie, but like Lonesome in the City and that kind of bluesy feel of Manhattan. And I think I made a few wolf calls or something. But, in a ballad, where you really got into some kind of... And the thing I did with Billie Holiday, I had a couple of nice spots that I felt pretty good about. The Lady in Satin album. That was all ballads, I think. Tony, he did a Penthouse Serenade, and I played one where I started way out low, like a bass trombone for a while. And it came out better than I thought it would.
Did you ever have an occasion to play or record with Joe Williams?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Tell us about Joe.
Yeah, they did some nice ballads with Joe. We had an orchestra with, strings and we did some small group things. That was one of the great things about doing the studio work, along with a lot of the garbage that they throw at you. There's all these wonderful people coming through New York all the time to make records, and I think he did this nice album. Joe Hunter wrote the arrangements. And right shortly after I arrived in New York City, I think in 1954, Buck Clayton was contracted to do these jam session records for Columbia. And I was called to participate in those. That was right after I had left Woody Herman's band. And got to meet all my old heroes on those records, like Lawrence Brown was there and Trummy Young was there. Roy Eldridge. Well, I had worked with Roy with Gene Krupa's band for a while anyway. But,
is that when you recorded the
Coleman
Hucklebuck?
Hawkins. Yeah, Coleman Hawkins.
Yeah. Wow, that's
Buddy
quite a
Tate.
list.
A lot of people. I got to meet all those people. I got to know them. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Hang out with Coleman Hawkins, boy. Something.
Did you ever have occasion to work with or be influenced in any way by J.J. Johnson?
Well, we worked together a lot, but somehow I don't think I was pretty strong in my own thinking, I guess, by the time we crossed paths. But he was doing studio work about the same time I was in New York. Then he went to California and never came back. But I admired him greatly, you know, what he does is just wonderful. He's such a musician and such a clean, neat player.
What was it like? Didn't you participate in the Benny Goodman story, the film of that?
Mm-hmm. Steve Allen played Benny Goodman.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what's it like to do a film like that? Is it sit around and wait a lot, or?
Well, Benny, I was working with Benny around New York in some small combo kind of things, like at Basin Street West. Teddy Wilson was playing with him at the time, and Paul Quinichette, Ruby Braff, and he had, and I just signed on at CBS as a staff musician there, and Benny asked me if I'd like to go to California to do the soundtrack for the Benny Goodman story. And I really wanted to do it, so I went and got a release from that CBS, and I never had a steady job after that. That was the last steady job ever, which is fine, because it worked out just the freelancing.
Yeah.
It worked out a lot better. But so Benny took me and Stan Getz and Buck Clayton and George DeVivier and Gene Krupa, Buck Clayton, out for the soundtrack. And while we were out there, the director of the movie asked us if we'd like to stay on and do the picture also. So we stayed and did the picture. Just another couple of weeks. We just pretended to be playing because we'd already made the soundtrack. And
I didn't realize that Benny was in on the movie too.
well, he was in the music part of it.
Yeah.
And he coached. Actually, they hired Saul Yeager. Do you know who Saul Yeager is?
Just the name.
He was a good clarinet player around New York, and his whole life was dedicated to trying to sound like Benny Goodman, and even trying to look like him. Like he did everything he could to look like Benny, and including filing his teeth in a curved shape or something. And he had all these actions down where he lifts one leg or whatever when he's playing, and so he coached Steve Allen on how to do all that stuff.
So the Elvis impersonations are not new.
Yeah, that's right. Wow.
Benny was funny out there. He decided he didn't like the way Gene Krupa played anymore. I think for some reason, because he was the star of his early band, you know, Gene.
Yeah.
And he was trying to get him fired. I would happen to be rooming with Gene on the set, like in the dressing room. We shared the same dressing room, and he said, "The old man's trying to get me fired." But he couldn't fire him because his contract was with the studio, not Benny. So.
Mm-hmm. Did he give him the Ray? I keep hearing about the Ray.
No, that's just a myth.
That's a myth?
He just, he might be looking at you but thinking about something completely.
Oh,
He's
okay.
one of those kind of people.
Yeah. And you think you think he's like trying to stare you down or something, huh?
That's what people thought. I never took it that way. I got to know Benny pretty well. He was very nice.
The Sonny Liston of musicians?
Yeah.
Stared at him.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Sonny Liston, yeah.
That's great. I have a quick story I wanted to ask you. I read about a fellow named Merv Gold.
Merv Gold.
Merv Gold.
Trombone player around New York.
Yeah. And some practical joke he did with some mouthpiece that he...
Oh, yeah, he was always doing, you know, he had a wonderful sense of humor. But he gave me a present of this mouthpiece, trombone mouthpiece, and said, I want you to try this. I call it my new Sure Grip mouthpiece.
Uh-huh.
And around the rim of it, where it fits on your mouth, he had made jagged edges all the way around, like teeth, so Sure Grip. So. Then another time he brought me a necklace of mouthpieces. He's always, one of these guys could never find a mouthpiece that he liked, so he had hundreds of them. He made a whole necklace out and put it around my neck on a recording session one time.
Interesting. How do you feel about your current working band that you have?
Well, this will be the second time we played together. We played one night a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Just we're not very organized.
That's jazz.
Yeah, well, that's
Sometimes.
my favorite kind of music now. Is when it's not so organized.
Uh-huh.
I did that big band thing I was on the road for 11 years from one band to another, and it's kind of a freedom to get out and just play with a little small group where you don't have any real arrangements. We have maybe an ending now and then, or how to start it, but but that's really what I like to do the most now. In fact, I always did, but I always got thrown on the lead trombone chair with all these bands, and some of them, like Woody's band, I was able to play both the lead and the jazz solos until Carl Fontana came along. Then we had to share the jazz solos. So.
We have asked a number of players about the etiquette involved in who gets the solos, and is it sometimes a point of contention between players, like, how come I'm not getting any? Al Gray talked about being in the Basie band for a while, and since he was the new guy, he wasn't getting any, and he didn't like it.
Well, the leader is the one that's in charge of who plays, And Gene Krupa's band, when I first joined Gene, he was a guy that thought the lead guy should only play the lead, and the second guy played all the jazz solos, and then Frank Rosolino came on the band, and I was just about that time I was going to ask Gene, I'd like to move over to the second chair, let somebody else play the lead, And then Frank Rosolino came on, and he was a fantastic player, and so I stayed over there on the lead for a while longer. Then finally he left and went with Stan Kenton, and I told Gene, I said, I don't want to play that second chair. I don't want to play lead anymore, He said, okay, you can play the second chair if you'll play the lead on the 4 trombone section thing, just where we have a melody thing for a while. So that's the way I ended up my last year with Gene. And then Woody Herman heard me play, doing that setup, and then when Bill Harris left the band, I took Bill's place. I don't know if you can hear me. I feel like I'm mumbling.
No, you can
okay, all right. I was saying to the monk, I've been wearing a hearing aid for about the last 5 years, and yesterday it conked out on me, and so everything sounds a little
It's not a good place to have things conk out on you.
No, I don't have a terrible problem. It's just like over years of playing with brass in your ears, I guess, and a lot of the high frequencies have gone. And I like to advise all young musicians to protect your ears a little better than I did over all those years. Like put earplugs in if you're in a real noisy situation. And I sat right next to Gene there, and the trumpet's right in back of you all the time. And I think it might have had something to do with it. I guess heredity probably has got something to do with it too.
Just one last question I wanted to ask you is jazz alive and healthy in the hands of some of today's young artists? And if so,
come hear Chris Prada and my son Jesse tonight. Well, you'll find out.
Great.
Oh, okay.
And we heard Antonio Hart.
Oh, Antonio Hart was good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's some really terrific young players around, and I think that maybe the general public is starting to place jazz into a permanent category. Well, like we're a young country, like all those European countries, they've got their folk music that took 100 years to get there, I guess, and maybe that's what jazz is. It's going to arrive. It's a situation now. I don't know what else can they do with it. really, it's, like bebop is supposed to be old now, but that's like 50 years old or so, right? And yet it still sounds pretty modern to me.
Yeah.
I don't know. So maybe the traditional, the Basie rhythm section, and of course, and it went a little beyond that too. You know, a little more freedom. But as long as you got that swing going, like what you don't mean a thing if it ain't got, right? But it's got to. Maybe that's going to become our folk music, you know, or the American. Well, they got polkas in Germany and Poland and everything. I don't know. And the Irish had their music. They had some music that sounded very much like jazz to me. Some of those Irish violinists, you know, sound like the Benny Goodman trio sometimes. You know. The violin, fiddle wailing away, you know. I guess that all went kind of down in the bluegrass country and related, but they get to swinging pretty hard there sometimes.
That's a good point, though.
And then the country western music now, they've got what we call a standard rhythm section. Like you've got the drums and the bass and the rhythm player. You know, they sound like swing music of popular swing music of the 40s or something, sort of. So they're not doing the same old thing either. But it seems like it's all coming kind of related.
Right.
Or something.
I think it's a good point too about our country not being nearly as old as some place. Maybe we're still sorting out our priorities as far as the arts, you know. I mean, it's interesting with jazz history that you can still hear some of the originators of Dixieland, the actual people, playing it, you know, and yet you've got the young folks here doing fusion and the whole gamut of music. You can still hear big band and bop and everything.
And commercials that you hear have got a lot of jazz in them these days. And in fact, I've noticed a lot of the current television sitcoms and things. They have a piano player. I don't know who it is, but some real good jazz players back there playing some nice stuff.
Okay.
So
Well, we want to thank Urbie Green for being with us today, and
Mrs. Green.
it's been a real valuable input to our Hamilton Jazz archives.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, Monk.
Right. Thank you.
And Mike. Take care.
All right.